Welcome back to Rebirth Revolution. My name is Melissa Olson. We've talked about the need to acknowledge that each and every person is working at their own level on their own curriculum. Next week, we'll get more deeply into what the levels are all about. But the concept that we are all here working on different objectives reminds me of a term that's used in childhood development circles. It's called parallel play. It's when toddlers can be in the same room, sitting near each other, playing with different toys. They don't try to influence or control each other or take each other's toys. They do look over occasionally and modify what they're doing based on what they observe the other child to be doing, or they just carry on as they are. They enjoy the company of the other child without needing to contribute to or control what they're doing. We need to be more like this. This practice is listed in the progression of ways that children developmentally interact as an early stage that they grow out of. We could probably stand to head back in that direction. We are entirely too involved in what everyone else in the room is doing instead of focusing on what we're doing. We're sharing this space on earth with one another, but are here from different levels working on different issues. We do not and cannot fully understand anyone else's curriculum. We struggle to figure out our own. The greatest sign of respect we can have for others is to allow them to do what they're here to do and to let them do it in the way that they choose. Their growth only comes from the choices they make. You can't grow someone else's life for them. Observing what they do and how they do it can be empowering for us. We can use that new information to choose what we want to do in our own lives. This concept is a struggle, especially for parents. You start with that blob who is not capable of making any choices and go through all the iterations until the child is ready to leave home and live on their own. The amount of input they need and will accept from you changes daily. It's a real exercise in self-control to allow your children to travel their own path without intervening unnecessarily. As humans, we tend to want to demonstrate for others that we know best what they should be doing. But if you're honest enough to look back at what you thought was brilliant a decade ago, you will wince, and rightfully so. If you aren't wincing when you look back at your choices and the thoughts you embraced, then you aren't growing. It is also human to be so addicted to the need to be right that we would rather stick with positions that we no longer really believe instead of admitting that we have changed our minds. Changing your mind is essential if you're going to do what you're here to do, learn and grow. All that being the case, here's another reason you may want to be more parallel in your play. The suggestions you are burning to make to others in the room reflect your current grade level, which the others most likely do not inhabit. Some will be below your level, some will be above. What you suggest will only be a demonstration of your level and most likely not productive for the others. The people who are at lower levels will not understand what you're suggesting, since they need to complete the coursework that is required to grow from where they are now to where you are now. There are no shortcuts. You can try to explain calculus to a kindergartner all day long, but if they're just learning the shapes of the numbers, none of it can possibly stick. They have to learn all of the math lessons between where they are and the calculus for it to make any sense at all. Years ago, we had some bats that found a way into our house. It was the horror film that you might expect. They would hide somewhere during the day and then start flying around the house in the evening. The first bat I encountered flew straight at me while I was on a treadmill. Bats remain arch enemies of mine to this day. As we were trying to figure out how to solve this nightmare, my 3-year-old son suggested that we could get an alligator, which we could keep in the bathtub. The alligator would get rid of the bats. While it was clearly a sign of brilliance that a 3-year-old already understood the concept of a food chain, we decided against this plan of action. When you tell people who are at higher levels of spiritual awareness than the one you currently inhabit what they should do, you run the risk of suggesting the alligator in the bathtub. The chances of you moving other people's progression forward with your suggestions are less than the chances of you moving your own progression forward by staying focused on what you are here to do. Trust that others will glance over and take from you what they need. If necessary, they'll ask for your input. Then it's fine to give it. In the meantime, you can stay focused on what you're here to do, taking inspiration from wherever your intuition points you. It's a great system. We'd love to hear what you think. Is there anything that is stalling out your forward movement? Let us know at rebirthrev, R-E-V, at gmail.com or rebirthrevolution.com or post on Facebook, where you can also send us stories through Facebook Messenger. In the first 3 episodes of Rebirth Revolution, we covered the 3 tracks you are working on in your life: the earth experience, the collective culture, and your individual spiritual awareness progression. These 3 tracks break down the issues of where we are, who we are with, and what we are doing as individuals. These tracks intertwine, informing, challenging, and ultimately creating growth in all 3 areas. The show Mad Men reminded me of something from my early childhood that now seems totally insane. It was the scene where Betty and Don take the family to a park for a picnic. They spread out a blanket and proceed to have a meal that comes out of wrappers, bags, and cans. When Betty cleans up after the picnic, she shakes out the blanket and all of their garbage is left behind. I gasped when I saw this the first time because I had forgotten how in our collective culture at that time this practice was thought to be completely fine. People dropped their garbage just about anywhere. They threw their garbage out of their car windows without giving it a second thought. These were crazy, messy times. Then there were some public service announcements, commercials like one with a Native American who had a tear running down his cheek that informed us that it wasn't cool to leave your garbage everywhere. Our Earth experience at the time supported the theory that whatever was easiest was what was best. Considering the outcome was not on anyone's mind. Companies freely dumped their waste into the waterways and on the ground around them. Then people started to get sick, really sick from the poisons that no one was at all worried about. People individually decided to start being more responsible with their actions as they applied to trash. Personal responsibility is an absolute necessity to move upwards in your spiritual awareness progression. high spiritual awareness level attributes like gratitude, respect, making choices that take into account long-term wellness, and being open to the beauty of the gifts around us make it easy to drop the habit of trashing the environment. Low levels of spiritual awareness exhibit themselves as entitlement, a feeling that they should not be held accountable, and a lack of concern with what the long-term outcome would be. And that made this practice feel normal to everyone at the lower levels. So as more people made the right choice time and again, it became an upgrade to the collective culture. This new baseline of behavior certainly changed the earth and the experience we all have that allows us to enjoy the magnificence all around us. This shift in thinking was a win-win-win. Even the smallest of interactions reverberate in all three arenas. Here's another example. Most people, as children, have the earth experience of learning to tie their shoes. The level of spiritual awareness of the person teaching you this life task will have everything to do with how the lesson is taught and how you receive the lesson. Teachers at low levels are plagued by thinking that everything is a huge deal and a win or lose battle. They are fueled by the need to control and dominate. Toddlers and babies make formidable opponents to those at the low levels, which is humiliating to them. Low-level people will always inflict damage on those they have power over. They simply do not possess the attributes to do any better. They have not grown into the levels where they are conscious of the fallout of their words and actions. They do not have respect for themselves or others. They lack basic empathy. It's a recipe for disaster. So there are 3 ways that a lesson can be taught and 3 different takeaways. Example 1, your teacher kindly shows you the process, offering patient encouragement as you struggle to get it right. Example 2, your teacher shows you the process while making fun of the fact that you don't already know how to do it. They become impatient as you struggle and lose their temper. The whole experience is fraught with anger and judgment. Example 3, your teacher ties your shoes for you. Each of these lessons carries a completely different message to the student, along with delivering a different outcome. In example 1, you learn to tie your shoes while absorbing the lesson of how to share information with others in a kind and loving manner. The spiritual awareness of both the teacher and the student advance. Both parties experience a heightened sense of self. Example 2, you learn to tie your shoes while absorbing the message that you are deficient and that people are cruel and not to be trusted. The teacher has moved backwards in their spiritual awareness, and the student will carry this around until they figure out what it means to them. Example 3, you do not learn to tie your shoes. You learn that you are not competent enough for the task at hand. The teacher's anxiety is calmed, and the child is left wondering what it means. That is, if they're capable of trying. Every interaction where a lesson is being taught moves both the teacher and the student forward or backward. A lesson is always learned, though it may not be the one that was intended, and it may take years to truly understand. The student needs to learn an earth experience that they don't know. They may or may not be developmentally ready for the lesson. It is the job of the teacher to determine if the student is ready to learn the lesson. Becoming angry and yelling at the student, as an example too, is completely the fault of the teacher, but the student is not far enough along to understand who's at fault here. Unfortunately, the student is likely to think that they are in some way responsible, that this says something about them. I think that many grown-ups carry around the wounds that were inflicted by bad teachers. And by bad teachers, I mean parents, caretakers, and school teachers. They store the memory with all the awareness that a small child could have, which is not enough to sort out the real truth, and haven't looked back since. They still think they were somehow responsible for the treatment they received. If you can make a child feel badly about themselves, they will believe everything is their fault. I think there are also a lot of teachers who still think they were made to be cruel by their terrible students, which is sad, because the choices they made fundamentally changed who the students turned out to be. They had impact that they still deny. As the student moves forward, they will either become like the teacher, or they will take what they know of how it feels to be taught that way and choose a way that is more positive. The student from example 3 still doesn't know how to tie their shoes. They have absorbed the notion that they are not capable of attempting the task. This diminishes their sense of self and creates a form of dependence at a time when they are supposed to be exercising skills that lead to independence. Everything that happens in your life is a delivery system for lessons. Every lesson changes the spiritual awareness level of all participants, some moving forward, some moving backwards. The long-term effect is that this dumps out into the collective culture, people who either have a healthy understanding of how to interact with others, or people who must overcome the damage others inflicted on them. There's a huge difference between someone who hasn't yet mastered the rules of the earth experiences, such as learning to tie your shoes, and someone who is working at a low level of spiritual awareness, leaving them unwilling or unable to feel empathy towards others. Some of the people who are succeeding wildly in earth endeavors, such as creating businesses or amassing wealth, are woefully deficient in spiritual awareness. Others who are working the higher levels of spiritual awareness may live lives that are simple and humble, though they're not limited to this by their awareness. Everyone uses their earth experience as the playground to work through their spiritual awareness levels. The net results are reflected in our current collective culture. You are the key to change, and you are in the right spot to make it happen. Next week, we're going to dive into a concept that will change the way you see everyone around you and the way you see yourself. The levels. What are the behaviors of people who are working at the lower levels of spiritual awareness? What will you see in those who are working at the high levels? It's vital that you always know who you're dealing with and what is appropriate to expect from them. Hey, we're now on iTunes, along with Google Play and Podbean. Please rate the podcast, leave a review, leave comments. Just generally let us know what you think. And tell anyone you know who might be interested in this type of content about us. I'd really appreciate that. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Until then, be open, be aware, watch for clues, and change your mind about something. Remember, you are loved exactly as much as every other person on the planet, not 1 ounce more or 1 ounce less. Until next time.